Hello and welcome to Access All Areas of SEND, the podcast. Today I'm joined by Shonogh Pilgrim. Shonogh has over 25 years of experience in the education sector. She started her career as a teaching assistant, going on to teach psychology and science in the counties around her home city of Bristol. Shonogh secured her first leadership position after 4 years of teaching, latterly having the privilege of being the principal of a single academy trust in the rural Somerset. Shonogh has worked relentlessly over her career to ensure that every student, regardless of ability or background, is given the opportunity to become the best version of themselves. Her work is highly praised by OFSTED in their publication Key Stage 3, The Wasted Years, which highlighted the strengths of her commitment to work with partner schools to provide the best possible experience for all students in the area. Shonogh is a passionate supporter of comprehensive education and believes that every child has the right to have a creative and enlightening education that prepares them well to take their place in society. Shonogh is hopeful by nature and believes that seed of brilliance lies in everyone. Shonogh took the difficult decision to leave her headship in 2021 to join Whole Education as Director of Secondary Networks. She is now the CEO of the organisation and brings her passion to working with school and trust leaders and their families to transform staff and communities. She's an avid reader and loves to listen to others talk about their shared passion for education and learning. Hello, thank you for joining me.
Hello, it's very lovely to be here with you.
We've known each other for a long time, not for the 25 years that you've been doing this, but we have known each other for a long time, and we've worked together as well, which has just been a joy. So when you and I had a conversation around whole education and this conversation around the podcast started,
Yeah.
I mean, I know personally that you are so passionate about inclusion. I am aware of your work that you've done with families in an area that's close to where I live. But you know, what drives you to inclusion? And actually no, let's start at the beginning. What do you think inclusion looks like in a mainstream school? Doesn't have to be secondary. I mean, a secondary I think is quite pertinent because I know families struggle more with secondary. But what does inclusion mean to you?
So the first thing I would say probably, and the word that came into my mind when you said what does inclusion mean was, or what does it look like, is messy. Like it's messy. It's really hard to be inclusive in, particularly in secondary schools, I think. And that is not a kind of sort of justification for not making it happen. I would not be that person who would be saying, oh, it's hard, therefore we can't. I think at primary, you see it much more intuitively, perhaps, although that has maybe changed a little bit with accountability and with our obsession with testing children and measuring them against a set of standards. But I think for me, inclusion is a two-way process. It's actually being welcome to be included and feeling like you are included and wanting to be included. Do you know? So I think there's a position for me as a leader, and I'm probably going to struggle to define exactly what it is because it isn't a definable thing in some respects. So I'm going to talk about how you do it in some respect. And for me, it's about creating a climate, a culture that says that everyone is worth it. Everyone is worth something or has worth, regardless of what they are or what they do or what they bring, and operating with that front and center in your mind. And as a consequence, wanting them to be there, because if they're not there, the whole is less good. And that, I think, is the nub of inclusion for me, this belief that everyone being present, everyone being represented is better than some people being missing. And so I guess the motivation for inclusion for me is like, why would you not want everyone to be there when everyone brings their own uniqueness to the situation and as a consequence makes it better collectively? That's probably what I would say inclusion is for me. So it's not a kind of, oh, everyone has got to have access to yada yada yada. It's a much more deep-seated fundamental belief about human beings and their worth, I think.
And how do you, I mean, it's right that, you know, we are, everybody's different. Everybody has needs. Everybody has needs that need to be met, every single
Yeah,
person. And, you know, how, and it is messy to make sure that everybody's needs are met, you know, reasonably well. You can't
yeah,
make it right for every single person all of the time, because that's
no.
difficult to do. But where, how do you get the buy-in from, you know, schools, parents, children, young people? Because it has to be everybody's doing it, isn't it? It can't just be one
Totally.
person
Mm.
in a school going, well, I need to do inclusion. How do we do that? And how do
Yeah.
we get the buy-in?
So I think you're absolutely right. You have to get everyone to buy into it. And I think often that does start with the person whose responsibility it is to make sure that a community is thriving. And, you know, as the principal, as the head teacher, I saw it as my responsibility to do the work to help everyone to understand what was possible. And so right from the very outset of me being appointed, properly listening to what people's hopes and dreams were for the community that we were. And I don't mean that, oh, we want our progress rate to be high, or, you know, we want them all to go to university. I mean, like, what do we want our kids, what do we want this community to be? What do we want our kids to be like when they leave us? What is the work we want to be doing in this organization? What matters to us as a group of people? And doing that with all of the staff, doing that with the parents, doing that with the students, and then looking at the picture together and being like, okay, so we say we want these things. We say we want all of our children to be independent, to be thoughtful, to be all of these things. Right then, so what does that mean? We are going to have to be, do, how we're going to have to show up to enable that to happen. And so getting that kind of, the way I would describe it is setting the light on the hill for people and getting them to connect with what they really believe matters, and then holding them to account for behaviors that mean that that would be achievable. And, you know, asking them sometimes when maybe they're fractious, you know, they've been spat at, a child has told them to go away in a not very polite way, asking them what really matters to them again, reminding them of the light on the hill. And I think I do see it as the responsibility of someone in a community. And do you know what? I don't think it matters in some respects who it is. The head teacher often is the one with the power to be able to convene people. They are community leaders, but someone grabbing hold of it and saying, okay, what do we want this thing to be? And what are we willing to flex in the pursuit of that thing that we all say that we want? And that, for me, is what inclusion takes. Like, it's really hard. And you never can meet everyone's needs. There is always going to be someone at some point who is not going to have what they specifically want. So knowing what it is you're trying to achieve in the more expansive sense, I think helps you to get through the bumping along a little bit better, because you can remind people like of what they said they wanted. And I think as an education leader, properly showing up for parents, properly being willing to listen to what they say and have a an equal discourse with them, not just going, oh, okay, that's what you want, so that's what we'll do, but like giving them the privilege and the respect to be able to say, do you know what, I don't really see it that way. Like, to have a proper conversation about what is and isn't possible, and what our shared commitment might be for the beautiful person that is their child that they're trusting us with. That, I think, is also really, really important if you're going to get this right. And I think often schools, am I allowed to say, shun that responsibility? Don't really engage as equals with other adults. They hide behind their professional persona, and as a consequence, parents and schools end up, I think, with a blame barrier between them. And if you just sort of showed up as a human being who saw the other person as equal, I wonder whether we'd get further.
I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I know of school. I mean, I've worked in schools. I've, you know, and I'm also a parent, carer, and I've worked with parents and carers as well as being one, and supporting them. And I think, you know, there is that power struggle almost of them and us, isn't there?
Mm.
And you know, this whether it happens in reality or not, but this perception that actually if a parent goes into school and says, well, my child needs X, Y, and Z, you know, this is what works at home. And then there is that perception of head teachers, Senkos, whoever, going, well, we just can't do that. And, you know, you're being tricky and you're being difficult. And whether or not that conversation has took place or hasn't, or whether that perception is just a perception, you know, that is what sometimes parents and schools are like, you know, I'm going to be fair, you
Yeah.
know, that's what they feel like, and they feel like they're up against it. And if everybody wanted, you know, to be inclusive, then it becomes more tricky.
Mm.
That said, I do think sometimes schools do try to be inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
but don't actually pull it off
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. Like their intention is never to be difficult, although some perceptions from parents might be slightly different to that, certainly to the ones I speak to. Um, so, you know, how it is, isn't it, about communication? It's about coming at it from an equal perception, and also as equals, as two human adults that are trying to do the best for the children in front of them.
Totally.
So if you have difficult conversations, so it could be that a school is trying to do that and parents are resistant.
Mm-hmm.
It happens. And equally, if you've got parents that are trying to do that with schools and schools are being resistant, and again, that happens, how do you orchestrate meeting in the middle? I know it's hard, but how would you do that?
I think there is a truth, isn't there, that the only person who can change their behavior, or whose behavior you can change, is your own. So I was in a conversation recently with a group of CEOs, and they were talking about the rise of parental complaints and how demanding parents are becoming post-pandemic is the thing. I mean, there is a moot point about the fact that schools did meet need in the pandemic, perhaps in a way that they don't, or some of them haven't, post-pandemic, and like whether parents got a bit hooked on need being met and now just quite reasonably assuming that we might continue to do it. That's a moot point, I think. But this group of CEOs were talking about this like parental complaint thing, and I just asked them the question, like, how many of you are parents? And apart from me, everyone was a parent. And I said, and how many of you have had reason to complain to your child's school? And again, every single one of them had complained. And I said to them, so what do you have reason to complain about? And they told me, my child's not happy, my child's not having their need met. And I said to them, and what is the difference between you and the parents who are presenting as challenging? And there was a moment of like, oh my God, I am that parent to the school. And so I think the reason I share that story is that whoever it is that's listening to this, the only person's behavior you can change is yours. So if you go into a room assuming that the other person is out to get you or that you're going to have a battle, then the likelihood is that you will. I would say, though, that if you're the school leader listening to this, you have power that the parent coming in doesn't have in your office. And so I would say that you might want to think about how you're behaving that might mean that they feel like they are weaker than you in some way, and as a consequence they've got to try to argue with you to get their point across. So that, you know, Darren McGarvey is the person who talks about the blame barrier. I would say that we're only able to remove the blame barrier from our own side, but as professionals we might want to think about whether we have more power to remove that blame barrier than parents do, because of the imbalance in power. So I think, honestly, Tina, it's about individuals realizing that the other person is an individual too, who could see them in a very different way, and trying to understand where other people might be coming from. So one of the things I was saying to that group of CEOs was, what would happen when someone came in and complained if instead of saying to them, right, okay, that's your complaint, you said to them, and what else? At the end. So you actually showed that you cared enough to check that there was nothing more that they needed to say to you, rather than trying to close it down for fear, maybe. Because like, I'm making no judgments. I was a school leader. I know how hard it is when you've got someone in front of you who probably is making some valid points and you don't know how you're going to meet their need. I understand that. It's really hard. But what would change if instead of being scared, I allowed them to talk themselves out, to get it all off their chest. And I was able to say, do you know what? I absolutely hear what you're saying. We're on the same page here. There are some things I'm not sure how we're going to be able to do. What would happen if that was the way we engaged, rather than, oh my God, they're going to ask me for things I can't do. I'm not going to be able to have the answers. And so I just need to close them down so that we don't get to that point where I can't give them what they want. In my experience, most parents, and there are some parents who become really unreasonable in the same way as there are some school leaders who become really unreasonable. In my experience, most of the parents who become really unreasonable are there because they've had to fight for their child for a very long time. And just having a little bit of empathy around how that is for people. But most people, when you're honest with them and say, do you know what, I don't know how we're going to do that, but how about we have a conversation about what we can do? And we make a commitment to try to work through what else we might be able to do together, like what might we achieve together. Most people just like go, because you've given them a really good listening to. And ultimately, often that is what they wanted. Just wanted you to hear them. They're not expecting miracles.
No, they're not, and you're absolutely right. And I think as well, we have to be mindful that if you've got a parent with a child with additional needs, although the inclusion actually is irrelevant whether or not about additional needs, you should be inclusive, regardless of whether they've got special educational needs or disabilities. You should be doing it anyway. But some families, some parents will not have had a good experience in school
No.
themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, I often have had conversations with parents whose, thoughts around schools is that it was awful. They didn't enjoy their time. They were deemed a naughty child.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, their child is exactly the same. It's in showing the same sort of behaviours. And so we do need to be mindful of that. And equally, we do also need to be mindful that if the child has special educational needs and disabilities or disabilities, that actually that's not, discriminatory either. That actually a member of the school staff could have a child. So the teacher in front of you might have a child with SEND.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't presume that they don't know anything about it. It
Mm-hmm.
might be that it's their experience, so it'll be different to yours,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't go in and go, well, you don't know because you don't know what
Mm-hmm.
it's like to have a child with ADHD or
Mm-hmm.
SEMH or whatever. And so
But what you absolutely don't know is what it's like to have that child, and be me.
absolutely,
And that's the
absolutely,
while I might be able to have empathy about, because I might have some experience of what you're talking about, I don't know what it's like to be you with your child. And just giving you the uninterrupted listening while you tell your story, even if at the end what I'm able to say to you is, do you know what, I don't know how we're going to provide what you're asking for. I think the common decency to allow people to talk about it is a thing.
it definitely is, and it's a starting point, because I know from families and parents that actually the worst thing you can do is shut them down, because
Totally.
they'll do one of two things. They'll either completely like retract themselves from any situation and you won't get them engaged
Mm-hmm.
anymore, or they'll come out fighting because
Mm-hmm.
they're in that fight or flight mode,
Totally.
where they will just come at you, and might be that unreasonable parent in your view,
Mm,
but they have no other choice. You've not
totally.
listened to them. You've not just gone, okay, I understand because you've told me this, and then had that honest conversation, like you've just said, Shonagh, around, thank you for telling me this. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to move forward with this.
And
But
one of the most powerful questions is, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do you want for your child? What is it that you
Absolutely.
are wanting here? And often it's not a particular type of provision. It'll be, I want them to be happy. I want them to feel like they're making progress. I want them to feel like they have worth. And actually you can then start going, okay, so there might be some things that we could do that might start to help with that, that might not have been the things you thought you wanted in the first place. But I think, and you know, I get all of this takes time, and teachers are busy, but so are parents. So are parents. Do you know, there's a balance there, I think, to be had. I was at an event recently where they were talking about the quality of our listening changes the quality of the talk that people give to us. So if we are able to open our listening vessel to be really big, people will talk differently to us and more expansively. So I do wonder whether there is instead of us being in a meeting assuming that what we're going to hear we can't deal with, if we were able to suspend disbelief about that a little bit, we might get a little bit further with people in what we do. So.
And I think as well, you know, whilst whilst the parents might be dreading going into school and having that conversation, that meeting, I've met parents, teachers or teaching staff or head teacher, whoever, be a little bit nervous as well about you coming in.
100%. There are 100%. And from the inside out, I can absolutely say that there were times when there were parental meetings that I was going to be part of, that I would be really terrified, not of the person, because invariably, you know, I've never worked with anyone who hasn't been trying to solve some sort of problem. Do you know, there have been people I've found it really hard who've got all sorts of issues themselves, and yeah, it's been quite personal. But if I'd taken away the personal, I've never felt threatened by people particularly, but I have been really anxious beforehand about how is this going to go? How is, you know, how am I going to manage this? How am I going to show up to not make this worse? I might have had a really bad day as well, and I might be like, oh God, here we go again. Do you know, there's all sorts of human stuff that is on both sides, and you know, sometimes owning a bit of that. I honestly do think sometimes as educators we are so worried about being professional that we sometimes make it harder for people to engage with us. And, you know, if we're talking about inclusion, as we've been talking, we've talked about children and including children in school. I do wonder how good we are at including other adults, you know, properly being open to, without judgment, to what they are and how they choose to live their lives. And maybe some of that sits around some of this, you know, this sort of, well, if we asked ourselves as educators properly, and as parents as well, like as adults, do we really like people like that? Are there any biases that we have that are meaning that we find it harder to include?
Yeah.
Some of the adults, never mind their children.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I absolutely agree with that. We talk about unconscious bias around diversity. And I mean, you know, the racism, diversity, but actually there is some unconscious bias much wider than that.
Totally.
And you know, I don't talk about my personal life very often. You know, before children, my childhood experiences, and it's because as soon as I open my mouth and talk about that, then this you can see people's change facially and the way that they treat you. So I don't talk about it very often, but I absolutely hear what you're saying, because not just because other professionals might view me differently, but my peers might view me differently too.
Totally.
And I've had experiences of that. And I absolutely think that in order for a school to be inclusive, you do have to push those biases to one side and go, well, whatever happened at that point in time has happened. You're now an adult, you know, and you've got children. Let's just move on from that, and let's just, you know, because my children have no experiences like I did as a child. None. It ended with me.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and I'm really proud of that. but it was a set of circumstances that led to that. I didn't plan it to be, well, they're not having that experience. And so why would my children be sort of treated any differently because of what I experienced as a child growing up? And I think that is the conversations as well that we need to have within schools around families and family support. And I've done a podcast episode actually with Brenda McHugh, and she talks about that because she co-founded the Pears Family School, which is in London, which brings families into the school environment, because she's got an AP, so it's not a mainstream school, it's an AP. But she brings parents into school for exactly that same conversation that you've just said, Shonogh, around if we're going to be fully inclusive, if we're going to welcome these children, you know, whoever they are, from whatever backgrounds they have been in, you know, to support the families moving forward, isn't that a really good thing, not just for the families, but actually for the school as well, and the sense of that community, because it is around community, isn't it?
It's about society, isn't it? Society
Yeah.
holding together is dependent on us working out how we care for in inverted commas, our most vulnerable and the ones who are most likely not to feel like they belong. Like enabling people to feel like they matter who are on the edges. Do you know? And it's, I think class comes into it. There is very definitely a situation around class, personality though as well, and the way that people choose to live their lives. You know, I've often joked that you know, education in my view is not about making everyone middle class. It's not about making everyone like I now am. It's about helping people to become brilliantly themselves. And we've got to accept that their parents are part of that as well. Like, not just accept it, but really relish the fact that, you know, we shouldn't be doing something that means that they don't fit with their parents anymore either. Do you know that they, and you know, some parents are not getting it right. Okay, there'll be lots of reasons that is going on. But I guess what I'm really saying is I think inclusion is about showing up without judgment in the first instance. There's a lot of work we do around special educational needs, as you know, as an organisation, and some of the things in that about sort of special school and mainstream, and like I think there will always be a need for some children to have special provision, but do as many of them needed as we currently have in there? I don't think that is true. Like, I think there is a lot of additional need that can be met if you think about it really carefully within mainstream. And I think that's, in my experience, predominantly what parents would want if they could be sure that their child was going to thrive. I think what we often end up with is people recognizing in mainstream that their child is not thriving and wanting the specialist because they see that children are more likely to there because it's more individualistic, you know, there's more adaptation that can happen. But I guess the challenge for secondary particularly is how might we get to a point where we're able to appreciate the brilliance of people on a continuum and not see them as, oh, they should be somewhere else. Because when that happens, and I've seen it a lot, you know, you can imagine as a secondary head, oh, you know, I can't be expected to teach a child with that need, or I can't be expected to deal with them because of their behaviour. Immediately that person has switched off. By saying that, it's like, well, now we're just in a holding pattern until they're somewhere else. How does it change if we accept that the best place for them right now is with me, even if there is somewhere better that we might be trying to get them to? How do we switch our brains so that we are the answer now and we do all we can, rather than checking out sometimes for a child because we don't know what to do? And I think, you know, I'm hearing some really interesting things from government about keeping children in their locality, but also about making sure that every teacher is continually trained to meet needs. And I think that is a very good suggestion. Like, how do we get teachers, because teachers are the answer here, in classrooms? How do we get teachers to believe that they can meet need? And it's a disposition thing. Like, I am a teacher who can meet need, rather than I'm a science teacher who can't or shouldn't be expected to. So I think there is something as well around what we believe about how we can meet need in education, or should meet need, or what is preferable, rather than this constant someone should be somewhere else because they're not quite the same as everyone. I don't really think that is very helpful, and we're running out of money, aren't we, as a consequence?
Well,
there's no money to do that.
And also, you know, when I mean, I said in a previous episode that children are one of the wisest people I know. You know, they are literally can be so wise, and they are exceptionally observant. They can see and hear things that have not been said, not been, you know, they've not been shown.
Yes.
And there is nothing worse for a child, I think, that feels like they're not wanted, or they're a pain, or they're in the way, or there's an issue.
And actually, the ones who are more likely to be hypervigilant are the ones who need it most.
For sure.
That to not feel like that.
Yeah.
They can tell from 1,000 paces whether you as a teacher think they're a waste of space or not.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, you know, what you've just said around, you know, if that relationship, and it is about relationships.
It is, absolutely.
If that relationship between a teacher and a child, and do not get me wrong, if the child is particularly challenging and you're literally pulling your hair out, I get, you know, because families will say the same probably about the same child. How do teachers, head teachers, schools, parents, carers work together to make sure that that child leaves that school, if that school's not a good fit, and the child ends up leaving for whatever reason, how do we ensure that it's I don't want to use the word damage, but essentially it could be, and it could be trauma.
Absolutely. Well, rejection, I think, actually.
It's rejection at the highest level, isn't it?
When we're asked to leave somewhere, even if it's in the best interests of us, there is a level of rejection that we experience, isn't there? Like you probably even like kids naturally moving from primary school to secondary school in transition, there is an essence of I'm not allowed to go to the school I used to go to anymore. I have to move to this other school. And a lot of primary kids don't want to go. Like they're a bit like, but I really liked primary, and particularly when they get to secondary and realise that it's much more rigid and maybe a little bit less interesting for them. It's not true for everyone, but it's very definitely a thing that being asked to leave somewhere that you belonged, even if it was not working for you, it still comes with its issues. And often the way this system is working at the moment, I think, because of funding and all of the accountability, and I say what I'm about to say with that caveat, like I'm not a fool. I understand how hard this is. I did it for 7 years. Do you know, 8 years as a head. But there is an incentive or a belief that what you've got to do is permanently exclude to get a child the next provision. I just wish we could get to a point where we could get people in the right provision so that you didn't have to do the extreme to get people what they need. Do you know? And I think the move towards enhanced provision, and you know, the secondary school I was a head at, we worked with our local special school to build a sort of, I called it comprehensive plus. It was like a place where they could have some of their kids who could access mainstream, and we could have some of our kids who needed a bit of something else to enable them to access secondary. Like the move towards that in communities, I think, is the right one. The challenge will be getting schools to feel capable of managing that, and doing that not just for kids who've got like polite special educational needs, if I can use that word, like the behaviour thing, ADHD, which tends not to be quite so polite as dyslexia in its presentation. I've never worded it like that before, but you know, like, how do we make sure schools don't just go for the extended provision that they feel comfortable with? How do we, because in my experience, ADHD is one of the biggest challenges in a secondary school. Like, and I don't know that very many people know how to work with kids who've got ADHD in that level of structure to do it really, really well. So if we're going to do this comprehensive plus piece, we probably want to be grappling with the challenging, like the ones that are really hard to meet need for, not just the ones You know, so some schools might go, oh, we'll have a dyslexia base because dyslexia is something we're quite comfortable. Our TAs like working with dyslexic kids, but we don't want any of the SEMH or ADHD because they're tricky. Do you know, we need that bit to be grappled with as a society. Like, how do you work with kids who stick out more,
And
cause
how
more
would you,
trouble?
well, yeah, and how would you know it worked if you didn't use it on the more challenging
Exactly.
children?
But it is harder because
Yeah,
it's
sure.
like trying to get, you know, if you said to me, I want you to run a marathon in world record time, I wouldn't be able to. I probably couldn't even run a marathon, to be honest, right now. But what we're asking kids with ADHD often to do, I think, is equivalent every day to running a marathon in a mainstream school, where you're asking them to do things that are just not possible for them. Like sitting down for an hour and not moving, not fidgeting, not daydreaming, not looking out of the window. Like, I could keep the list going on. And for them, possibly more than any other type of need,
Mm,
secondary school is alien. I would say some of the spectrum, you know, the sort of the autism as well around noise. Like,
mm,
secondary schools are noisy places as well, and not only noisy, but we almost seem to take noise as a benefit. Do you know that, like, being chatty and is, you know, contribute, please. Well, I'm a quiet person. Why do you want me to? I don't need to contribute. Why do you need me to? All of these things are so counter what this person is. Like, how do you manage that when it's like being an alien in a different world, you know? So I think if we're going to make it work, we've got to grapple with the hardest ones, not just with the easy ones
yeah,
to meet need of.
yeah, because otherwise, how are you going to know it's worked? I
Yeah.
mean, that's a perfect segue because obviously, you know that I collect questions and feedback from the potential audience, and we did have a question around inclusion, and it was, how do we help schools to feel more able to create provision for children with SEND when the process and achievement data challenges can disincentivize? See, I said it that time,
You did.
Shonogh,
Very well done.
because I struggled in the pre-talk. So you know, Progress 8 for one is one of the, you know, battles, league
Hmm.
tables, GCSE results. I mean, I had a conversation this week around families who children went to an independent setting, and the independent setting said, well, actually, we think that we're not going to do as many GCSEs because we don't think it's in the best interest of the children. So we're going to do BTECs or other
Hmm.
you know, qualifications instead. And some of the parents were really quite cross that the children weren't doing GCSEs. So I think this is the problem, isn't it, with the system, is that we've got lots of things of which schools are measured on the achievements, the attainments of the children. And then we've also got expectations of society around what the expectation is when they leave school.
Hmm.
You know, how do we provide an inclusive provision for children, young people, when you've got all those things on the outside, on the periphery, that
Yeah.
are playing into those
Totally.
outcomes?
If I had the answer to that, I'd be like much more well known than I am. However, there are a couple of things that I would say. The first one is, like, I've been talking to an MP recently. We had a round table with an MP on Monday just gone. There is very definitely a move in policy from a narrow curriculum to a broad one, a narrow experience to a broad one, a desire to balance achievement and thriving, so not having attainment at the expense of thriving. So there are some things that are starting to soften. I think the OFSTED framework, sorry, not the OFSTED framework, the curriculum review that we saw recently has taken some of the power out of Progress 8 and added the arts and subjects like that back in. So I think there's that bit of like some softening in policy. They're still talking about standards being important. Like, I do, one of my pushbacks to them was, are you looking at the unintended consequences of the standards agenda? So what is happening when something does work that you didn't intend it to intend to happen for longevity of life and thriving in the world. So I think there's some things to still think about there. But the other thing that I've been thinking about recently is how do we have a conversation as a society, as the people who decide ultimately what the policy is? Like, so as the electorate, how do we have a conversation more expansively about what we want for the education of our young? Because actually what I've seen happen in the school I was ahead at was when we started to collaborate with our parents really, really well, you know, we were not perfect. There's a whole load of people who would probably tell you what was awful about it. And, you know, they'd probably be right because we're human, do you know? But what we got really good at was talking to people about why we were doing what we were doing. So bringing people with us on the journey of, you know, the way we manage behavior is like this because we believe these things about the way that people are. And I think, honestly, as an education sector, as people who are meant to be experts in education, I think we could do with really introducing the rest of society to what the other options are, apart from the ones that they experienced as children themselves. Because the collective illusion is that you have to have GCSEs to be successful. Less and less employers are using qualifications as a way to decide whether someone should be employed. You know, AI is transforming the way we do these things. So I think we could do with checking actually whether what we believe is true is actually true anymore, and having a more expansive conversation with the people who vote about what this society wants for its young, so that those people become the citizens that we want them to be. And until we do that, I think we're going to be stuck in this trap. So what I'm saying is basically schools can do what they can do. Parents actually and the electorate could work with schools to create an enabling climate by basically leaning into what we might be able to do differently and influencing policy that way. And so I've become more interested in how do you get alongside people and start having the conversations about what education could be in the world we currently live in, rather than what it was when we went to school. So I think there's something interesting in that, perhaps.
No, absolutely, because I agree with you. Because although although the school buildings are probably the same, what happens in it has changed dramatically from when I was at school to when other people were at school. Do you know what I mean? And
well, in some
whilst
schools, in other schools, it's more like it was in Victorian times.
Well, maybe. I was trying to sort of be kind, but you're right. And you know, I think as well that the thoughts that our children need specific things to get on in life, actually, we're focusing on the wrong things. Sometimes that means that they can get on in life. Like
And
we're
parents getting
focusing.
really stressed as a consequence.
For sure, for sure, because they just want the best of for their children.
100%.
And no one's going to take that away from them. But if I thought that my child needed 5 GCSEs, A to C grade to do anything in life, I'd be a nervous wreck now, because I know that sometimes in certain subjects they wouldn't achieve that necessarily. And has that taken away the fact that he's bright? No. Is it taken away from the fact he's polite? Absolutely not. Is he, you know, doing lots of different courses at college now? Absolutely. And he has a desire to be something, and he's getting those, you know, courses done to be the thing that he wants to be. So I think we do have this unhealthy attachment, I guess, to what's always happened.
And to qualifications.
Yeah.
Is the thing, I think. So everything we do is directed towards qualifications.
Yeah.
And actually, there's an educational
And not
philosopher who I really like the
experience.
work of,
Yeah.
who talks about actually education, one of the purposes of education might be qualifications, but it's not the only one. And actually becoming qualified is not the same as having a qualification.
No.
So I guess there's a question to ask about if we really thought about what we, you know, and I'm a taxpayer. I don't have children, but I'm a taxpayer. So I am investing in the education system. If I was investing in a business that was meant to produce a product and it was producing a product that I wasn't happy with, I probably would have been having a conversation with them about, like, do we need to change our manufacturing process? Do you know, and I'm not likening a person to a commodity, because I absolutely believe that that is not the case, but I think our education system is likening it to a product. But the product we're getting is making, I don't think it's helping in our society. Do you know? So we've got a lot of very fragile people who don't know that they have any worth coming out of our education system, having been told by the age that they're 3 or 4 that they're not normal, they're below age related expectations, and their parents are really stressed about that. And, you know, I've got family who around the SATs time were like, my child is basically being sick before they're going to school, they're so anxious. And my point to them was, don't send them in.
Yeah.
They don't mean anything. Do you know? But so we've got all of this anxiety and stress. I'm not even really sure it's real. Do you know? So I do, you know, I sound like a raging progressive, and I'm not actually. I believe that education is really important, but not the narrow, lifeless type of education that leaves people thinking that some people are worth something and other people aren't, in a very arbitrary way. And that, I think, you know, circling back round to what inclusion is, I think inclusion, it's not about lowering standards, it's about making sure that our standards don't lower people's belief in themselves, so that they become adults who can't navigate society or feel like they're not worth anything. I think that is more damaging than not achieving a standard, quite honestly.
I absolutely agree. And it also goes back to the point that I made earlier around children are savvy. They know when they're not feeling welcome. They know when no one wants them. And, you know, they will grow into adults that will take that trauma and anxiety around school and education and that low self-worth, they will take that with them. And then what we don't want is for that to hang on to when they have children, and then they feed that to their children.
Totally. And you end up with those dispositions of people like us don't do that. You know, my lovely working class parents had all sorts of things around people like us don't do that, Shonogh. People like us are grateful for this. And it's like, I don't want the children who are coming through our education system and the parents they become to feel like they're not allowed to appreciate things just because of where they came from or where they find themselves now. I similarly don't think that they should start needing to love classical music if classical music is not something they love, but they should be able to if they want to. And that, so, you know, inclusion is not about selling my dream of what someone should be to them at the expense of their dream of what they should be.
No.
Either. It's not about making everyone the same.
No, it's their dream. And enabling them or supporting them to deliver on the dream that they focused on.
And to work out what their dream is and to keep working it out. So, you know, inclusion for me as well is enabling people to see everything that is on offer, even the things they don't think they want, to have a look at it and go, do you know what, that's not for me. But also to have a look at some things and go, oh my goodness, that is for me, and I would never have thought that. That for me is really important.
It definitely is. So as I'm putting this podcast to a close, this episode, what is the final message that you want to give to, I'm going to start with schools. So if you're working in a school, if you're a teacher, if you're a head teacher, and or even a TA, lunchtime, whatever your role is within a school setting, what conversation should you start having around inclusion? Because some schools will say, no, we're inclusive, and they probably are to some extent, but to some families they may feel that they're not. What's that starting point for a conversation?
Do you know, again, I'm just going to take it back to, it always starts with you. So the first question is related to what you just said. If you spoke to any head teacher, they would tell you they're inclusive. And I would just say the question to anyone in the sector is, what do you mean by that? So get exercised. Like, when I say I'm inclusive, what do I mean by that? And are there any blind spots in it? So am I inclusive, or am I inclusive to certain types of people? And like, again, with no judgment, just be honest with yourself about it, because I will absolutely guarantee that if you can't be honest with yourself about it, you're not doing some of the things you probably could. So if what you actually come across is, we're inclusive as long as people are not disrupting other people's learning, okay, that's where you are. But be aware that anyone who is disrupting other people's learning, you are not being inclusive of. And you might be good with that, but don't not admit it to yourself. So that would be the really easy thing to do. And once you've got that, ask yourself whether you can live with that. Because if you can, okay. If you can't, you will then take action. And I think what we've got sometimes is people just not even going, yeah, we're inclusive, and not really pinning down as a person and as an organization what they really mean by that. And as a consequence, when they get into battle with parents, they're not even really looking at the problem, because they're operating, we are inclusive, and they aren't actually on the same definition. So that would be my
Perfect.
answer.
And what if parents are feeling that they're, or even, you know, children, young people, they might be listening in on this conversation in the car as they're being driven to school or whatever. If they are just feeling that they're being pushed into a silo or squished to follow everybody else like sheep. And don't get me wrong, there is a need for that within schools. You do have to toe a line, because that's what society is, and if you're pushing against society all the time, then you're going to struggle. But there is an element of that inclusive practice, that feeling included, feeling belonging, because we mentioned the word at the very beginning about belonging, and belonging is so important, especially with our young people. If they're not feeling that, what starts a good, you know, what is any good advice to have that conversation around, you know, the inclusion, apart from being probably honest around what you want to get from the conversation, maybe.
So I think if you're an adult, if you're a parent, I think the question would be the one that I said that I used to ask parents: what is it that you want? And I don't mean like, what do you want me to do to fix it for you? I mean, what is your motivation for wanting this? So, because actually, in my experience, if you can explain that to a teacher, you know, look, all I really want is for my child to be happy. What I really want is for them to feel like when they come here, you see them. If you can go to that level and connect with someone on a personal level, often they will. So instead of going in and demanding, I want a one-to-one tuition, a one-to-one TA, I want overlays for everything, I want this, you know, there are a multitude. I want them to be allowed to come in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and only stay for 20 minutes and not go anywhere near a lesson. You know, if you're going in with that, you're probably going to get people with their backs up about what they can't do. If you try to remove the blame barrier yourself and think, what is it that I do really want that they might also want? How can we find that common ground? And actually believing that you are entitled to be equal to them would be for the adult. And for the child, I think it would be like, look for the bright spots, look for the one person in that place who you do quite like. It might be a teacher, it might be another child, and like build from there. So honestly, Tina, I'm a big believer that carrying your own safety and your own belonging with you is the pinnacle, like not needing other people to define it for you. And I understand that's really, really hard when you're a child and when you're a young person, and you might not see anyone like you, but like, look out for the little bits of hope. Try to find someone in school, and there will be someone. I'm guaranteeing you'll be a teaching assistant or someone on reception or a head's PA or one of your teachers who, if you just smiled at them might show you, and you might have to try a few different ones. But like, again, don't sit and wait for it to be done for you. It's the answer to everyone, isn't it? It's basically, what bit can you do? And not sit and being a victim, because like, you've got more power than you think you have to do something about it for yourself. So look for someone who smiles at you.
Yeah, because I think, you know, to end on it, is inclusion is not just one person, it's a culture.
Totally.
It's a tribe, it's a community, it's your people. And if you stand there and expect your tribe, your people, the inclusion to come to you, then it's not going to, is it? It
And
is.
ideally you want people to, but they might not.
Yeah,
And so if you, back to that thing, if you can only really change your own behavior, if you want to matter somewhere, start mattering.
yeah,
So start letting it matter to you. And I think
yeah,
sometimes with kids, you get to a point of, I don't matter here, so I'm not going to let them anywhere near me. Like, start behaving like it matters to you.
yeah, because it does. And
Yeah, and
and it opens doors, doesn't it?
totally. So like, all of this stuff is glib comments, and like, you need to know that I know how hard it is, and all of these things are imperfect suggestions, but that I've seen
Work.
start to make a difference. And you know,
Yeah,
another one for kids is like, work out who the people who matter to you, and only worry about what they think.
yeah,
That is another like really powerful thing. So if someone who you know doesn't care about you, and you don't care about them, says something to you, don't let it affect you, because you don't even care about them. So what, that can be another really helpful thing, like, who
mm,
matters to me here? How do I make sure that I hear what they say, and I don't get caught up in all of the noise from people who don't matter to me?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Thank you, as
It's my
always.
absolute pleasure. It's been lovely to talk to you.
I could talk to you for ages, Shona. Thank you so much. Thank you.